Good morning, and welcome to another podcast. Today, I got Van with me. We're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about consistency and where you should apply consistency, and well, for me, kind of this is how I do this, or kind of how I'm doing it for my just life overall. I do it in my parenting, but kind of how I apply consistency to drive results that I'm hoping for. We'll kind of get some advanced thoughts on how he's applying it, and kind of go from there. So, how are you doing this morning, Van?
You know, it's harder to get up for some of these podcasts today, but I was up okay. I mean we record at 6:30, and I I set my alarm for 5. So that's not typically when I get up. So I got up at 6. It was all right. I mean, I got to sleep all right at the right time, and the kids were asleep. But I mean, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready for some good conversation today.
Excellent. So today we're kind of discussing consistency, and this has been on my mind quite a bit from last weekend, and kind of seeing how some other people parent, and then how I parent, and then it kind of stretched out to just how I do stuff overall, and where I am inconsistent generally are the parts of my life that I want to improve anyway. So how can I change those things, and what does it mean to be consistent kind of throughout? So let me go ahead and kick it off. So to me, consistency, when I say that, it means like doing the same thing all the time. Like my getting up is a great one. I try to consistently get up at about 5. I am inconsistent in that because I suck. And I'm okay with that. But now that my fitness isn't quite where I want it to be, and knowing my current schedule with kids, the only way for me to get it done, unfortunately, is to be up at 5 so I can get lifting in. I have to be up at 5, otherwise it won't happen. I know, like, if it's after 5, it's like consistently just not going to get done because I have other obligations every single evening for like the next month. I think I get Friday nights off, but that's like when I would like to see my wife. So for me, it's kind of like doing things that I know should be done is the consistency that I'm looking at, not the consistency of doing the stuff that makes me not better. Because I'm always trying to be better. Um, so that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say consistency, and then I look at each of my kids and where they're consistent and how can I help them be better, and then how can they help me be better. So the areas that I look at are um, fitness is always big for me because I'd like to live longer, and I want to stay stronger than my kids as long as possible, like physically. Learning, how can I learn more? How can I be better at my job? How can I learn for my job? And then how can I make sure that I'm, being just better in my relationships are kind of the areas that I really look at being consistent. So kind of what are your thoughts on what are the areas that you try to be consistent in, and we'll kind of go down that path. What are you doing to be consistent, or um, what are the areas that you'd like to be more consistent?
Good question.
I feel
I
like in this
think
podcast, we talk a lot about where we're great. And I think sometimes it'd be valuable to talk about where we are less than ideal.
mm,
So I'll do both ends for myself.
I think the one that I is always on top of mind is being. I think we always talk about being present, but I think the thing that I always try to be cognizant about is being there for my kid, just physically. Uh, and and then it kind of goes into presence to me. So I think we've talked about it when I'm at work, when the clock hits like 5 or 5:30 or whenever I'm done, it's just everything off. And it usually includes phones as well. And that's when I've kind of gotten weird responses from, not weird, but responses from people like, "Oh, why didn't you text me back?" or whatever. It's just I just didn't have my phone in my hand, and I wasn't consistently looking at or my watch, which gives me just notifications, which is kind of the dumb thing about Apple Watches, that doesn't do anything else. Um, that I just didn't have it on because battery just gets drained all the time. But that's one. The other is, if I do have another, it's probably being cognizant of what I eat, which which is which is typically the main problem of any health problems I have. So it's kind of a balance between Vietnamese food and what I would typically make for myself. So I've asked my wife, if she does make me anything Vietnamese, is just we swap out a few ingredients for better ingredients, or not better. I don't know about better ingredients, but like just ones with less carbs, or ones with, I don't know if it has less calories or not, but better kind of sweeteners and stuff like that. So we'd swap out like white sugar with coconut sugar, or uh, I don't know if she uses the other one that I use. I use what I use in my coffee.
Splenda, stevia.
No, I don't know. It's a 0 calorie replacement at Costco. So that's what I use. And that's the other thing. I drink. I mean, I don't know if you see it. It's completely black coffee. I put, man, I can't even think of the things I put in here right now. The 0 calorie sweetener and the collagen. I put collagen in there, and that's it. Otherwise, I'll drink it black, which is a lesson that I've learned not to put anything in there, because if I mean, there's a milk that I could put in here, but it's like 170 calories, so just the additional calories, so it just makes me bloated and stuff like that. So that's the other thing. I would want to say one other is just consistency with time with my wife, or consistency with having conversations with my dad that I said that I would do with him, but I haven't been good with those.
I gotcha.
I think the wife one is hard because I think I already kind of couple that with the family time, but I obviously can make time with her just alone. But it is harder because I've told you my schedule. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I get up early and go volunteer, and then I'm just kind of after at the day at work. It's like I'm pretty exhausted at like 5, and then I eat, and then I'm already tired. So at some of those days, I want to go to sleep at like 7. So which is the typical time that I should go to sleep to go volunteer. So those are mine.
Okay. For me, I understand the consistency with eating. I do struggle with that. I like to count my food. Well, when I say I like to, I don't actually like enjoy it personally, but I think it helps me to achieve goals because then I can know where I'm at. Because again, I think things need to be measurable. Um, so that's something I also struggle with. I do struggle with. I'm generally present, but I do a lot of stuff on my phone, and it drives my wife crazy. So I think that's like a consistent thing that is consistently aggravating to my wife specifically. So I've been trying to be better about that, and it's just for me, it's learning stuff. Like I go down rabbit holes all the time of what can I learn, or what can I do, or what do I need. You know, if my kids have questions, what I might need to point them in directions and kind of understand things in that way. So I look at it like that a lot. So the other part of consistency that I've been exploring kind of in thought is we have a friend whose kids are a handful. I was trying to think of the nice way to put it. And what they do is when the kids, one of them is not ideal, they're just naughty or whatever. They sit him on their lap and they like bear hug him, and the kid is just like beating the crap out of this person, just flailing because the kid's upset, like doesn't want to be restrained. And I understand the thought process behind it, but then I also understand like I couldn't do that to my 13-year-old. Like he's too physically strong to be restrained like that. And I've seen this. He's got four. One of them's a high schooler, so we can't do the high school. The high school is cool most of the time, as cool as a high schooler can be. So what I was seeing was this consistent behavior. They don't interact when the kids do something, and then all of a sudden it's this: I'm gonna bear hug you in a timeout, and the kids aren't responding appropriately. So like it's a consistent behavior that isn't garnering the results that he's looking for.
Let's set the stage. I'm I think I have part of the picture. So where were you at? How old was the kid? What led up to it?
We were at a
How many
party.
people? How many people were in the room as well?
A lot, a lot.
Like
Over 10
50?
people in the room.
Okay.
Over 10 people in the room. Probably about right between 10 and 20. Kid under 5 was not listening.
Family? It was a family event? Or
Yes. Yeah.
so like brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts,
Yeah, a lot of
uncles.
people there.
Okay. But no strangers, like
No,
or
no,
acquaintances. Okay.
no. Primarily only family.
5-year-old and he has more, does he have other kids as well?
Yeah.
Was this his youngest or
No,
something?
no.
Okay. So he's like a 5-year-old.
Yeah, second youngest.
Okay. What did he do? This is a male child?
Yeah. I don't even remember what the kid did because I'd walked in on it and I've talked to a couple people about it. Just having parenting talks of like what I've done or whatnot. Um,
What was he do? Was he just screaming and then he bear hugged, or I don't
I
really
think
care
he
what he
wasn't
did, but
listening.
okay.
Generally speaking, he was doing wasn't listening or was going, was breaking whatever house rules were in place. So it was a way to break the behavior. So I do agree with the fact that okay, like he's engaging, he's break whatever behavioral pattern is happening. He engaged to stop that because he wanted like they needed to stop whatever it was. I think the methodology in which he used was ineffective because and it just I think it more escalated the kid than anything else because the entire time instead of what did the kid need and why, it was how can I get away, right? And again, it might work for some kids, but as I was thinking through, again, it's a consistency thing. What is the best way to handle that? And and again, I was talking to family about it on both sides and getting some feedback. And it was really interesting
Oh wait.
on what
So
to
when you say
do.
so when you say that, it's when a kid is not listening and breaking a rule. So I mean to relate it to myself, I would if it was Jace, he would typically if he's not getting what he wants, he would scream. So is that what happened, or it was just like a rule, don't be touching that, and then bear hug, or I'm not gonna
I
give
think
you
there was
that. You're screaming.
warnings. So generally there are warnings like, hey, stop it. Like I think I don't know the exact pattern of warnings, but it's generally like, hey, knock it off, stop. And then
Okay.
okay, the behavior doesn't stop, and there's an intervent like another kind of intervention. It's a physical, like not like hitting, like there's no hitting. But it's like the hey, you're gonna sit on my lap, this is a timeout, and I got you.
Okay. And then when you're asking your siblings or um, other family members, how are you phrasing the question? Just like that?
Yeah, so like because they were there. So like for me, like again, painting the picture, something happens, kid gets a warning, okay, they don't listen, parent intervenes, picks up kid, puts kid on lap, hey, this time out, boom, I got you. And the kid is so focused on the I got you part of it, that I question if the lesson part was clearly communicated, because the kid was just again just thrashing. So like he's taking, a little bit of damage on this because the kid's like, bucking his head and he's kicking and he's squirming, and it's just, you could tell that he wasn't, that it was physically uncomfortable for him. So the way
So
I
let's
phrase the
go.
question is, I asked the people. So I was like, well, what are your thoughts? Because again, I parent a little bit different. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way, but and he's, their families, everybody's got a bunch, it's got a bunch of kids. I got a bunch of kids. We all have different stuff going on in our lives. Um, and so my question was always like, what are people's thoughts? And I got some from people that have grown kids, people have little kids, but middle kids, whatever. So that's kind of the context of it, and what got me thinking about consistency and like how I deal with things, and why I think my kids behave the way they do. So
So let's kind of do situational breakdown or something like that.
Mhm.
So you saw and you experienced that. What goes through your mind when that happens, and then how would you approach it if it was your kid?
so what went through my mind when I saw it was like, oh man, that sucks. Was what went through my mind, right? Like that sucks. Like the kid's getting pissed. Like obviously he's not happy. Like the parent's not happy, and it's just this interesting like dynamic where everybody, like, other people kind of get a little bit involved. Like I don't get involved in other people's parenting stuff. Like I'll give that, like I'll talk to them after, but like in my opinion, like when they're in the action, they're committed to it. Like I don't think people should be like, some people shouldn't get involved. Like some people, other parents, grandparents, potentially depends on the relationship. So I wouldn't personally get involved in those situations, but you know it's also, there's an attention component of this, of the kids getting greater attention, and some kids respond better to, oh, I'm the center of attention now, so I can, if I do this behavior, this is what happens. So for me, when I see these things happen, uh, I look at it as, okay, what would I have done different? Is this the appropriate response? And recently, because I've had some people ask me a couple things about one of my kids, and it is consistency is why they're as successful as they are. All of my kids are actually very consistent, and it's a behavior that I've worked on for a really long time. And I didn't realize it until we started having these conversations with a couple different people of, okay, what does that mean? So that's what I think. As I see it, I'm like, okay, that sucks. I would handle it differently. Is it, does the punishment, is it justified for the action, and are you getting the desired response from said punishment? So that's how I look at those things, like the whole picture. The, if then it doesn't make sense. So,
Okay, how would you handle it?
so after thinking about this, I think the reason that my kids respond the way that they do is because I talked to my wife a little bit about it, and my mother and my aunt and a couple other people about how I deal with my kids. Is even when they're really little, so sub 5, like I've always done that. It's a pattern for me. Like I like call and response. So for me, if they're misbehaving, I remove them from that situation. I'm very much a praise in public, punish in private. Like I even think that with kids, with the exception of like if there's like, hey, I'll give them a warning. Obviously, like, hey, I don't like that. Um, Verbal stuff. I like, but if I'm gonna like, there's gonna be like an actual consequence of like you're getting a timeout, you're losing something, whatever. I'm not a hitter. Like that physical punishment's not in my repertoire of things. It just doesn't work for my kids, and I just don't want to do it. But when I go to do that, I remove them. So I'm removing all stimulus other than I want them to focus on me as my goal if I can. So that's how I look at it. And I don't want people judging me. Like I don't want advice. I don't want other people involved, other than a co-parent. So for me, that's what I would do. Like I would take that kid and I'd either take him to, another room, the garage, bathroom, whatever. Like, hey, let's have a quick chat. So I engage very directly of like, hey, I don't like this. Do you understand? and I'll wait for them if they're really emotional. Like again, it's hey, I like this, and I make it very clear. Like I don't like this. I set my expectation of hey, this is not acceptable. Do you understand? And then we get to that understanding of like I don't. If they ask why, sometimes it's an explanation, and sometimes that explanation is not appropriate. So for me, I remove them. I generally I like to take their hands. Like I like a tactile, a physical, tactile kind of response to get them to engage with me. So I hold hands with them. I tell them what I don't like. I level set my expectation. Hey, I don't like that. Don't do that again. Here's what I want from you. Okay. If you do that again, this is the next step in punishment. And then I always follow through. So like if I say it, I do it. And I do that for both positive and negative things. I don't really lie. It's not in my nature. I just don't. But if I say it, I do it. And that's been consistent since my kids were really little. Like if I told them, like, hey, you're getting a 2 minute timeout, they got a 2 minute timeout. If I told them they were getting a 10 minute timeout, they got a 10 minute timeout in it. Sometimes a 10 minute timeout or a 2 minute timeout could take 20 freaking minutes because I want to keep on losing their crap. So I'd like, you can't start until you're, in the corner or in the, whatever. So for me, it's the consistency always be if I say it, I do it. And I don't ever have stupid, I super hate it when parents do this. They have like these outlandish punishments. I'm going to ground you for a month. You have no intention of grounding a kid for a month. Don't say that because then you're inconsistent and like I said it, but I'm not going to do it. So then they're going to push it again. So for me, it's always if I say it, I'm going to do it. And it's always the same pattern of behavior. Okay, we separate hands. I don't like this. Here's what I want. Do you understand? And then sometimes that's enough now. And sometimes, all right, you need to sit here, calm down, get your poop in a group, and then we can go back out. So that's how I deal with things. And it's always the same. And I didn't realize that until I had actually been talking to a couple of people. I'm like, oh, here, like you always do the same stuff, Brian. And I was like, oh, that is consistent because I look at it like call and response. If I do this, they know how to respond. And then it I think calms them.
I can go into what I would do, and it's not very different. I guess I would ask you before I go into mine, do you ever do, and there's probably other things that we do you do anything other than timeouts?
Yes, privileges can be lost at this point in time. That's when they were littler, but my kids are a little bit older now. So they lose things. Like, hey, like
Privileges
you
now versus
yeah.
little. Little didn't you didn't really have privileges, right?
When they were little, they could still lose stuff, but when
They
they're
didn't really
really
care.
little, like when they're sub 5, that doesn't matter.
It
Like,
doesn't care
okay,
because
you
they
can
like
have the
you.
iPad tomorrow. That kid doesn't care. That kid's not even thinking about tomorrow. That kid's thinking about 5 minutes when I get the hell out of this corner. So I choose a punishment that was appropriate for the age that had an impact that they didn't like.
Hmm.
Right. So like a 5 minute timeout, like I want to run around with my friends or my siblings or whatever, or like I just don't want to sit here. That was a big enough impact to deter them from doing it. That was the cost was not, the juice was not worth the squeeze in that case. Now, to put a kid in a corner for 5 minutes, they wouldn't care. They'd be like, oh man, I'll sit here for 5 minutes, Dad. I'll sit here for 15. Now they lose a privilege because that has a bigger impact on them. And it depends on the offense, for lack of a better term, right? It could be something simple like, okay, no iPad, for the next hour, or you can't have that, or, no dessert, or, I'm not going to take you and do this. You've lost this event, like you've lost this opportunity. And so it can be things like that. I leverage those more often than not. Now, generally speaking, we have a conversation where I level set my expectations. And they meet, like, I'll be honest, generally speaking, my kids meet my expectations. I just tell them this is what I want, and if it's and we'll have a conversation about it. Is it reasonable? No. Okay, why not? Well, I don't want to do it. Well, I don't care. Like this is my expectation, and then we go from there. So it's a little more open communication now since they're a little bit older.
Okay. And I think that's probably where we're headed. I think
But you can't do that
uh,
until they're
I'm
old enough
I'm
to get it.
always I'm always curious how you get to those things, but we can get into that in a little bit. So yeah, mine's not too different. I think I was kind of thinking about what I do in that situation. Excuse me. My son has a particular behavior that we're trying to work through, but I'm not there. necessarily during the day to be able to handle it. So, I mean, if it was my kid in that situation, I would remove them. And this is just based on a little bit of instinct and a little bit of things I've already learned from parenting and through books before that. So I would remove them. Uh, First, I would probably do a warning, and it's not because any reason, because I don't want to take drastic action right away. There have been times where I don't give warnings previously with Jace,
Hmm.
and I that was something I took straight from a book, but also there doesn't need to be a warning, I don't think. If they're
It
breaking the
doesn't.
rules, if they're breaking the rules or whatever expectations I put out there, you get a punishment. And
Yeah.
then the explaining part, it's only if they're calm to start with. And that's part of the warning part that we give the expectation, but like once they get past that warning and they're still doing it, it's just straight into the timeout and probably into a different room. There was a time, and we could potentially get into it. We were at the Children's Museum in Madison where there wasn't really a spot to take him, and we put him on a bench and just kind of dissecting that particular incident. I probably would have needed to get him out of there to take less attention off of him. And I think he continued because he was surrounded by people. But yeah, I would take him to another room. I would put him in a timeout. I would first let him calm down, and I think this is an episode we haven't put out there yet. It's discipline that we should probably put out there. But ever since he could make trouble, which is probably one or something, or when he could run or walk, it's always been timeouts for us, and it's always been
Yeah.
similar. I think we were experimenting at the beginning about what was a proper punishment and things like that, about how to get him to change the behavior. And that's when I started reading books and things like that, and we came to timeouts. And it's always been the same. It's always been, I don't particularly sit him or touch him. I think I've sort of implemented your hand holding, and I think that's gives, I think the reasoning behind that is to get touch or kind of make them feel safe.
Hmm.
So I've sort of implemented that. I haven't had a lot of time to try to do that, but it's always been calm down first, and then the time starts. And then once you are sitting there quietly for that amount of time, you can go. And that's always been it. And then there's been other times where he eats and he likes to listen to music, ABCs and stuff like that. My wife's been implementing, and it's in the book in the book we've been reading as well. It's called Raising Lions. I think it's by John Newman or something like that. And I can obviously find that later for people. But it's been turn off the music for a minute or 2 minutes until you calm down. So something similar to privileges.
Hmm.
So it just kind of changes because again, you do need it does need to be disliked for them to change the behavior. So
Correct.
it's similar to that. So I mean with the consistency part, I think you just need to find what works, and you're just kind of dumb if you don't keep doing it. If you find something that works, just use it, and if something that doesn't work, you should stop and try something
Yeah.
else. Um, so it's just, and also if you're having trouble in like public spaces, I mean, take them to more public spaces. I mean, do what we're doing, analyze
Hmm.
what you did wrong. If they think they did something wrong, first off, you kind of need to accept that you did something wrong first, and then reevaluate and try to do something different. But also try that at home first,
Yeah.
and then, I mean, that's what I prepare for. That was the worst of it when we went to the Jones Museum, and he was just screaming. And I think about that when we kind of when you were talking and just when we di discipline Jace at home, it's like, how do we not have that happen again?
Yeah, I agree. So I think it's kind of problem solving at home. I think it, and again, I think it's important. So a couple things that I realized about consistency is like one, when things start to go off the rails, I try to make everything that I can do as predictable as possible. So like I keep my emotions as in check as possible because if I escalate, then there's no point, right? Then my escalation just escalates the kids. I try to keep my voice even. I repeat the same patterns. I everything is consistent. Again, if I say it, I do it, and I go over it, and I do my best to be as consistent as possible. Um, and I know some parents like it's not necessarily that you do anything wrong, but if it doesn't work the way you want it to, then I would say change. I think even with little kids, I think conversations are always warranted because if you don't let them know, if you don't consistently let them know your expectations, and I set high expectations for my kids, like incredibly high, because if you set them high, kids will meet them. Is what I found with my children. If I set a
What's an
high
example?
expectation, they'll
Example
meet
of a,
them.
what's your example of a high expectation?
Currently, I
Sure.
have so right now, like I have my kids during the week when and I'm in the office a couple days and my wife works from home. I have created a list that I expect it to be done when I get home. Like there's no exceptions to this. Like if you do not like we have a daily report. I expect it to be done. This list consists of household chores, just normal stuff, make your bed, like don't if you mess up the kitchen, clean up your mess. So it has household chores. I have one thing a week that just needs to get done. Wipe the floorboards, wipe the cabinet face, organize the pantry. I do not tell them how to do it. I just tell them to get it done. I was like, if you need help, I will organize your day for you, but you don't want me to do that. So part of it's making them learn some organizational time management skills. Not only does it have that, they are required to do an hour of like fitness related stuff. So if they want to play outside, I'm cool with that. Um, but generally speaking, like my son just has taken charge of that and like he works out with his sisters. He's like, here's my expectation, and he's teaching them some stuff. So they have household chores, they have fitness, they have to read for 20 minutes a day in an approved book. And it could be a fun book, but it can't be like a little kid book where it's like for 4 year olds, right? And I expect them to be learning. And then they have business stuff that they're required to do as well. So I think a learning thing for them to learn more about business, and then they have an actual business that they're each trying to launch, like several business ideas.
And
And
this
that's
is
about 3.5 hours worth of work that I expect done every day.
and this is
And
that long because it's summer break, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That makes sense.
If they were in school, then it would be different. It would be I would have well, they'd still have chores. Um, but I would structure it differently. But with them being at home and having nothing to do, they have about 3.5 hours worth of stuff that I expect done. They two of them missed it recently because they didn't plan appropriately for having a friend over. Then we had a conversation about like, hey, I still expect these things done. What could we do better next time? And it was a learning opportunity. Um, and they let them troubleshoot it, and they came up with their own solution, which I found to be acceptable.
That was my
And
next
I have one
question. So is there a punishment or is it just a conversation?
right now. It's just a conversation. The
Okay.
punishment is if they were to consistently not get it done, then I would schedule everything for them and they would be tied to that schedule.
How would you hold them to that if you're not home?
Um, I mean, I have
Or
a parenting partner
do you
who's
do
home.
it? Okay.
So,
Okay.
and if they don't do it as required, then they lose privileges.
And then you need to run that by Darla then, I'm
Yeah.
assuming. Okay.
I mean, most of it's pretty like nothing outlandish, right? It's just do your stuff. So our
I
house
mean, but you
is
you have to have her check in at specific times though. It's like, oh, she's gonna do this at that time. Is that okay? Kind of thing.
yeah. So if there's going to be anything that would disturb her during work, then we schedule it. Otherwise, the kids have like they have from 8 to 4:30 to figure it out.
Right. But if your next step, because I'm thinking of
If
how
they were not to
to
comply,
And I mean, and this is probably you already structuring from small to big. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about how to start it, because Jace is not going to do that.
Well, Chase can't do that because he's so little. So starting from small to big, it's giving them simple tasks, right? It's expecting them to
Right.
do like setting that higher expectation. So like when they were real little, like they always thought they could help, and kids always can help. So it was something very structured of like, okay, we're going to set the table today. Like your little is little. Like you're obviously not going to give him glassware to take to the table, but you can give him, whatever you're not afraid of being broken. All right,
Yeah.
here, I want you to take this, put it on the table.
Yeah,
Okay.
we do some things like that, but I'm thinking about other dads that have kids just like you or aged just like you. How would they start? How would they like they're sitting around on their iPad all day. How do we switch that to 3.5 hours of doing
Productive
things?
stuff.
Right. And
So
they're
if
not
I
gonna
were,
do it. And they're not gonna
yeah.
do it the first day. They might
So
if they're good, but then the
here's
next
how.
2 or 3 days, how do you get them to do it?
So here's how I would do it. I would get a very like depending on how old your kid. If your kid is 13 and under, I would get a book. It's called The Warrior Kid. Right, there's like five of them. I would get them that book, and I tell them they need to read one chapter a day, and I would read that chapter as well. And then at the end of the day, at the dinner table, whatever you're doing, I would talk about what I learned in that chapter, right? And I would expect them to have read it. And if they didn't read it, then I'd be like, all right, you didn't read it yet? Cool. Go read it now. And then we'd have that conversation about, like, okay, what did we learn? So I would start with something real simple. A chapter in this book said it's not a super hard book to read. I think my 8-year-old's reading already read one. She's into the second one now. And then I would start doing something as a family, right? So, okay, and now we're going to spend 30 minutes. We're all going to clean. Here's my expectation of you. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I want you to get it done. And I would give them a very specific chore that I know that they can do. And if they did a crappy job, I'd be like, all right, good try, but here's what I want. And I would clearly lay out my expectations. So like when I tell them to do the kitchen, like I clearly let them know, okay, I want all the dishes done. I want the counters wiped down. If the floor needs to be swept, sweep the floor. If there's something that you look at and you're like, that shouldn't be there, then put it away. Right. And then if there's something that I come home and I see it and I didn't explicitly say that this was my expectation, I will call them and be like, hey, I don't like this. Like right here, like, what do you think we should have done with this? And generally speaking, they'll be like, well, I should have put it away. Or like, hey guys, I didn't think about it. Can you help me out and do this? So I'll do it both ways. Like I'll either say like, hey, I don't like this, and you knew it, or like, hey, I need you to help me. Can you do this? And then they'll generally jump in and be helpful. But I think it's clearly articulating your expectations is a requirement. And I would start little. I'd start with a chapter and a chore.
Okay.